Good morning. I am your instructor for the course ECO 412. The title of the course is International Economics and Finance. The prerequisites are microeconomics, macro, and econometric methods. Here are the objectives of the course. Any international trade course has topics related to pure theory of international trade policies, international monetary theories, and international monetary policies, including discussion on the GATT and the WTO, and the negotiating positions of countries on each provisions of the multilateral trading system. In the pure theory of international trade, you study why do countries and firms trade, what is the pattern of trade, which country trades with the other country of the world, and in the pure theory of international trade there are various theories, right from Ricardian theory of international trade to Heckscher-Ohlin to Linder's hypothesis to Krugman's new trade theory, and then finally to the new trade theories by Mellets, Eaton and Cotton, Cheney and Reddings. International trade policies covers all the trade policy instruments that the country has or they're available to a country for protecting the economic interest of the country, of the member nations. And these include tariffs, quotas, export subsidies, import subsidies, export taxes. It includes all non-tariff barriers like sanitary and phytosanitary measures, technical barriers to trade, other non-tariff barriers. International monetary theories are about what determines exchange rate movements. International monetary policies are about the role of the IMF and World Bank and the past and present monetary arrangements. So, this course will further discuss what policies are available with countries to protect their economic interest and how trade policies impacts the welfare of the trading partners. The course will also cover various approaches to the balance of payment and discuss the past and present arrangements of the international monetary system, including discussion on the European monetary system and the optimum currency area. OCA is another name for a region which has a single currency. The course content would include the world trade and empirical facts of international trade with its explanations, neoclassical trade theories, alternative and new trade theories, trade policy instruments and their impact on welfare, trade and income distribution through Stolper-Samuelson theorem and the Ricardo-Wiener theorem, international factor movements, negotiations at the GATT and WTO, exchange rate movements and past and present arrangements of the international monetary system. Interestingly, we'll also cover up regional trade agreements, trade creation and trade diversion, apart from the theories of exchange rate and balance of payment and different approaches to the balance of payment. This is the lecture-wise breakup of the topics. We'll start with the world trade and empirical facts of international trade and explanations, and a little bit understanding of the globalization process, the cost and benefits associated. And then there are other topics like theories of international trade, alternative theories of trade, then empirical testing of trade theories, international factor movements, economic analysis of tariffs, international monetary theories, and then at the last, international monetary policies. These are the references. The main reference material is the book by Feenstra and Taylor, uh, which is International Economics, Worth Publishers 2008. I believe I have a soft copy also. So I'll be sending Feenstra and Taylor. And then there are other books like Krugman and Opsfield. Then there's Handbook of International Economics, all the 4 volumes. Melvin, Salvatore, Baldwin, Peter Kennan for International Monetary Theory and International Monetary Policy. Ravindra Batra for purely on pure theory of international trade. Then readings and journal articles and YouTube lectures distributed by me. Evaluation is through mid-semester, end-semester examination, assignments, and paper writing, including synopsis preparation. We are also trying to have our PhD scholars uh, in this course who will be doing course on ECO 752, Quantitative Analysis of International Trade, wherein the focus will be on the partial and general equilibrium analysis of international trade. We have just bought GTAP 10, so that will be a useful tool to analyze the economy-wide impact of, say, tariff escalation. Then there are other partial equilibrium models like SMART model, and then we have the other topics. Uh, in a way, we are trying to make some sort of a distinction between your course and this ECO 752 course with some additional readings, especially related to journal articles, and also focusing on the quantitative analysis of international trade. The references, as I said, is Feenstra and Taylor, but then there's another book by Feenstra only on the advanced topics in international trade. We also have Hurtle's book and Burfisher's book on the topic related to general equilibrium analysis. Uh, the lectures will be through our recorded lectures. Initially, they will be audio, then later on, they will be video. I'll be going on the whiteboard and then trying to record it. These are unprecedented times. These are first times for all of us. So we'll be experimenting with that, and everything will be available through the MooKit platform. But apart from that, these social media tools uh, like WhatsApp and Facebook will be used thoroughly. So you need to share your WhatsApp numbers. You have to become my Facebook friends. There are further resources which I've spelled it out. Uh, because once you talk of international economics, you cannot just detach the idea of growth. because growth is a function of many variables and trade is just one of them. So, whether it is David Weill's book or Wozniak and Welch uh, paper on trade liberalization and growth, or some other readings which I will be sharing once I go along discussing my slides. So, how is trade openness related to GDP per capita? You can see this is the source is Saxon Warner, this is 1995 work, and Wozniak and Welch 2008 work. The source is Weil David's book on economic growth. It says that countries which open up, they are the ones which will grow at a faster rate. Okay, and and you will see in the coming slides that the channels are many, because when you trade in merchandise, you trade in services, then there are foreign investments, and over and above this, trade also brings new ideas, new managerial practices. It brings efficiency in the economy. It brings competition in the economy. So there are various channels through which openness and GDP per capita are related. It's not very intuitive. One needs to research more to identify these channels. But ideas, efficiency, competition are some channels through which, you know, trade promotes growth. Well, if you don't open up and you have very high tariffs, like what you've seen now in this uh, COVID era, or probably in the post COVID era, you have countries which have adopted protectionism. This is like the landlocked nations, which the empirical evidence shows that they have lower GDP per capita. So, all landlocked countries, there is a list, have lower GDP per capita. So, think of uh, countries which raise their tariff bar, raise their customs duty. This is equivalent to saying that it is a landlocked nation. So you can very well expect what happens if you close, if you deglobalize. And unfortunately, that process is happening in this COVID times. You've seen already there are countries which says that if the vaccines come, we'll first cater to our own nation, or we'll first give it to a, a single country. Like Switzerland says that we like to give the vaccine to, say, US first and then later on. And in this context, it's very important to have a world order wherein multilateral institutions are strengthened, whether it is WHO or WTO or ILO. All the trade in goods and services, health services, labor services have to operate under the aegis of these multilateral institutions. So we have to bring a new world order wherein these multilateral institutions are strengthened. Otherwise, there will be individual countries which will which may adopt protectionist policies to the detrimental interest of the member nations. This is a graph which says what's the growth before and after trade liberalization, and you can see that the evidence shows that generally the phase before trade liberalization and after trade liberalization, you see a jump in the growth rates. Now, you may very well wish to know the process through which this happens. Paul Krugman was the one who could explain this through his new trade theories, that when countries liberalize, there will be some countries which need to exit, and there will be others who would take up their job and reap economies of scale, produce more at a lower cost, and then export it to the other countries. So, once there is trade liberalization, there is something called the selection effect, exit of some firms, but then there are other firms who pick up the business, reap economies of scale, produce goods at a lower cost. Now, the firms generally which exit are the low productivity firms. So you can very well imagine that what happens to the overall productivity if the lower strata of firms in terms of productivity exit, then it's bound to happen that the overall productivity goes up. So this graph shows some evidence of that. Well, as far as India is concerned, I've listed some agricultural goods which can be exported, apart from the fact that India has to do a lot in at least three areas. I say three E's. This is what China did from 1990. They increased their trade fivefold of what it was in the 90s. The three E's are electronic goods, electrical goods, and engineering goods. And we have to ensure that we turn the tide in our own favor. In technical terms, we have to shift the comparative advantage in our favor. This is the famous flying geese model emanating out of Japan. But given that we have an advantage in the agricultural goods, these are some goods that we could focus on, whether it is silk sarees or biscuits or honey or Nagaland's pineapple, uh, in Bihar, Madhubani's paintings, lychees, some jackfruit and rice, Meghalaya strawberry, bamboo furniture, and then more importantly, we have to focus on alternative energy needs, be it the biofuel, aviation and maritime fuel coming out of, say, ethanol, methanol, jethropa plants, rice, paddy, corn. These are things that we need to do in times to come. So what I'm trying to say is that if we look at China, for example, China and India had the same GDP, or probably China was a little more, around 300 billion US dollars in 1990. India was around 200. And now their GDP has gone up to 13.5 trillion US dollars. India has gone up to from 200 billion to around 2.1 trillion US dollars. Their trade to GDP was around 2% in 1990. Now it's around 13%. Their share in world GDP has gone up to around 13%. Our trade to GDP ratio is much lower. So they, they must have done something to boost up their economy. And one way was to promote trade. And look what has happened to their GDP. As I said, they focused on the three E's: electronic, engineering, and the other E, electrical products. And you can see the difference. In 1980, if you had worked out the per capita income in PPP, purchasing power parity, we had a PPP GDP per capita much more than China. But they initiated the economic reform process way back in 1978. We did it in 1991. Our per capita income is 2,500 US dollars. Their per capita income is 10,000 US dollars. So you can see, very well imagine what's the importance of trade. And one area where we have done quite well is in terms of IT services. The total value of the IT is around 181 billion US dollars, wherein the exports are around 137 billion US dollars in 2009. So this is one area where we have done quite well. Although the balance of trade, which is the difference between exports of merchandise and imports of merchandise, that's negative. But when it comes to trade in services, we have been able to do quite well. And they are IT enabled services, business processing services, and so on and so forth. India's export share has increased from a mega 0.67% to around 1.66%. Our share has gone up, but not to an extent of what China has done. Okay. As I said, trade share in their world trade has been around 13%, and their GDP in world GDP has been around 10%. Their manufacturing output as a percentage of total manufacturing world manufacturing is much more, it's 30%. Ours is on the lower side. In fact, the manufacturing share in our GDP is omega 15%. Okay. So we were 27th as far as gross exports are concerned in 2007. We have improved our position in 2017 to 20th position. But after this COVID crisis, where we'll see a fall in trade, one third of the, the fall would be around one third of the total trade. Similarly, investments will also fall by one third, and remittances will also fall by one third. But what is to be noted is that at least till 2017, from 2007, the imports were much greater than our exports. It's only after 2016 and 17 that we see that the exports and imports are going down because of the protectionism all around, be it because of the Brexit or the trade war between US and China, or we not signing the RCEP treaty with the ASEAN plus 6 nations. We have seen a spurt of deglobalization happening, and that has reduced our exports and imports to a level that our imports have fallen much faster than our exports. That has generated some balance of trade in our favor. So you shouldn't construe this as a gain. This is happening because of protectionism here and protectionism outside, and this uh, happened after 2016-17. But how has India evolved since independence? You can see that when it comes to population, GDP, per capita income, I mean, uh, from just rupees 274 in 1947, we have reached around 1.34 lakhs. Okay, so this is yearly figure. Then poverty rates have reduced. We have been able to diversify our industry. Literacy rates have gone up. Life expectancy has improved. Food grain production has gone up. Electricity consumption has gone up. Imports, exports have gone up. Length of our roads have gone up. Railway networks have improved. Car ownership has improved. So we've surely seen India evolve over independence. This course is about trade and its role in promoting growth, and in that process understanding what explains trade between nations and firms, and also trying to understand that how does exchange rate moves, what factors lead to exchange rate movements. This is a plan of China and its selected industrial policies and plans, right from 8th 5-year plan to the 13th. And you can see that you see an upward trend in the nominal industrial output because they have been able to focus on lately telecommunications, ports, and global value chains. Their concern is, of course, energy needs, and so they're looking for alternative energy needs through electricity driven vehicles. So, telecommunications, outward FDI, building ports outside, and then harboring the value chains is the Chinese strategy of moving up the ladder as far as industrial output is concerned. And in that process, they're focused on ICT, they're focused on reducing carbon emissions. They have been focusing on automobile industries, wireless techs, then the four IR technologies like robotics, automation, Internet of Things, biotechnology, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned from what China has done. So as I said, the sources of growth is not just comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, as you will see in lecture 3, would be something wherein if you can produce a good at a lower opportunity cost, or if you can produce a good at a lower relative price, then you have a comparative advantage. So it's just not comparative advantage, it's just not trade, it's competition, uh, it's market size, it's investments. These are important things for growth to happen. So apart from trade, you need to focus on competition, market size, investments. Of course, trade brings ideas from abroad, it brings competition. Trade also promotes investments. There is some empirical evidence on that. This is growth before and after trade liberalization, as I had shown earlier. This is what trade does. The idea is to understand the underpinnings, the channel through which this happens. Now, this is using non-parametric plots. We try to plot India's state GDP against various variables defining the economy. Now you can see that this is a non-parametric plot. We do not impose any function, but you can see that in India, if you talk about the 37 odd states and union territories, what promotes state GSDP is investments, then now doctors, that is health capacities, GST collections. When it comes to gross enrollment at the primary level, there is an inverted U relationship, and all this requires attention. I mean, you need to give reasons why is this happening. And if you focus on 215 COVID affected countries, then you can see a relationship here between regulatory quality, which has become immensely important during this COVID era. You don't find much of the relation between regulatory quality and GDP across 205 COVID affected countries, but surely GDP and democracy are related. Higher the economic intelligence unit index of democracy, higher is the GDP. Now you have to understand the democratic process or the democracy index It may mean different things to different people. It may mean financial decentralization, it may mean administrative decentralization, it may mean political decentralization, it may mean freedom of press, it may mean ICT reach, it may mean more of media reach. Whatever it is, this index is a very comprehensive index, takes into account various factors. You can see that higher the index, larger is the GDP. I'm trying to give an account of what explains GDP. I said trade is only a part of it, right? This entire course will be about trade only. But then, if you have to give a larger picture, then you have to understand what explains GDP of the country. Now, unfortunately, all these stringency measures, this is an Oxford University stringency index based on 17 measures. If you use that particular index and its sub-measures, you see that these sub-measures are related negatively with the GDP. Okay, so the message after this analysis will come out that these stringency measures have impacted more the GDPs of the countries than having a dent on the COVID cases, COVID recoveries, COVID deaths, COVID active cases. You can see what school closing does, what workplace closing does. The evidence is very clear. It affects the livelihoods. It affects the GDPs. But surely health expenditure promotes GDP. Stringency, as you can see, that has probably it is all stable till a level. The stringency value varies from 0 to 100. But if you have very high stringency values, your GDP falls. These are a relation between domestic travel restrictions and GDP. You can see a negative relationship. This is our stringency index. So this shows a bimodal distribution. You have two peaks. So there were countries like the East Asian countries, some of the East Asian countries, Oceania, they had lower stringency index, but there were others like some in South Asia like India, or say South Africa, or some countries in Central America, some countries in Latin America, which had very stringent lockdown measures. So you can see that it's like a bimodal distribution. What has definitely is this all recent data that what has definitely happened is that countries which have higher GDP have higher pollution, and then these COVID deaths have reduced GDP. Stringency index and GDP are also related. This shows that countries which had higher GDP, they adopted higher stringency values. Unfortunately, India, which is like a developing country, adopted very strict stringency measures like the ones which prevailed in the developed nations and which had its repercussions, uh, be it the case of reverse migration or now the same set of people, because they've reached the rural areas, the cases are also increasing in the rural areas. Then undernourishment and GDP. GDP is also related. Poverty and GDP is also related. So the developed nations have been impacted more economically. Initially, of course, the cases also went up. Now we see a lot of undernourishment, a lot of poverty. Poverty may mean different things in different countries, but that's the evidence. And this is about life expectancy. Higher the life expectancy, larger the GDP, larger the population proportion over 60, lower is the GDP. This shows what GDP has done to inequality. It has, it has gone up. Okay. So you can see that GDP is what causes GDP, a whole set of factors, and where trade is one of them. And why we study trade, because we've seen evidence very well documented in Sachs and Werner, and we've seen in case of China that what trade did. Of course, there were other factors, like the quality of institutions, the share of investments in GDP, which promoted their growth. But there are many factors which explain GDP. Now, if you focus on India's trade, you can see that in 2007, India's export position was 27th in the world, accounting for 0.96% of the world gross exports. And in 2017, India's position was 20th, accounting for 1.66%. This is quite low. If you look at China, this has gone up to 14 to 15%. India has been consistently being a net importer of intermediate goods over the period 2008-2017, meaning that they need the raw materials for their final production, and this has come from the rest of the world. It is also a net exporter of final goods and net importer of capital goods for the period 2008 and 17. The source of all this is a recent World Bank publication by Dr. Sanjay Kathuria, who is the editor of the book called The Glass Half Full: The Promise of Regional Trade in South Asia. Although this is focusing on South Asia, but initially they have put some empirical facts of international trade. The share of final and capital goods was 33% and 6% respectively in 2017. More importantly, India has been participating less in the global value chain. Now you have to understand what value chain is. You have to understand that the production processes are fragmented now. Right from the idea, the conception of the idea of producing a good, to its production, to its marketing, to its after sale services, and so on and so forth. This has all been fragmented, where a part of the production process is concentrated in some countries, while, say, for example, a lower end production process gets outsourced to the developing nation. But whatever it is, if there is a foreign content involved in your exports, that's good. This is what China did. As I said, China focused on 3Es. It focused on telecommunication. It focused on ports, developing ports outside, and it focused on harboring the global value chains. So India's participation in GVC is mainly on account of source of intermediates from abroad. Share of intermediate inputs in domestic value added increased for most manufactured goods in 2005 to 15. There is a paper by Atu Korala which argues that import substitution policies adopted by the Indian government until as late as 1991 explain India's failure to fit into global production networks, particularly in the electronic sector. And India's overall export share from the 50s to 2011 or contribution to world exports have been very small. In the same period, other developing countries, particularly China, emerged as the export hub and in and participated extensively in production sharing. And now we've seen uh, uh, a narrative which has been built in India that exports are good, imports are bad. It reminds of mercantilism. It reminds of protectionism. We've already seen empirical evidence of what import substitution policies can do. Unfortunately, they are seeping in in India. So we have suggested somewhere else, we have written also that this is the time that we focus on shifting the comparative advantage in our favor through 4IR technologies, through telecommunications, through FDIs, through development of ports, and through uh, you know those three E's that we keep talking about: the electronic, and engineering goods. Uh, there's a lot of talk uh, on India's trade dependence on China because in these unprecedented times we have seen an economic and health crisis, but we also saw a security crisis with uh, things going quite to the contrary in the border areas in Ladakh, and therefore there was a lot of societal aspirations being built that we need to now reduce our dependence on China. And the reason is, if you look at the dragon share in our imports, 70% of our pharmaceutical raw material comes from China. 45% of our fertilizers are coming from China. 38% of electronics from China. 38% of our organic chemicals from China. 31% of machinery and nuclear reactors from China. 25 to 27% of our auto components from China. And we know about mobile phone components, 25%, 18% in plastics, 13% in urea. So this is our dependence. And you've seen antibiotics, pharma ingredients, telecom equipment, semiconductor in devices. There's so much of dependence on China. There's also Chinese investments, which are around 26 billion US dollars, and they are all spatially distributed all across India, be it infrastructure, consumer goods, automobile, energy, real estate. As far as Chinese phones are concerned, there are Chinese made of 68%, the rest is 32%. And if you look at the trade imbalance, we import from China around 74 billion US dollars, while we export to China around 18 billion US dollars. So you can see that the trade balance is not in favor. Around 50 billion US dollars is the trade deficit. Point is how to reduce the trade deficit. So this, when I talked about international trade policy, we will talk about all instruments which are available to reduce this deficit. One of them is, of course, tariffs. This is what US did for curbing its 320 billion US dollars of trade deficit with China. But is this the only way to reduce this deficit? Okay, there are many economists who may not agree for imposing tariffs. They may see this that the deficit may be uh, maybe uh, sustainable, and if the deficit has to be reflected, it has to be reflected in the in the exchange rate movements. I mean, your currency necessarily has to depreciate uh, if it has to if it is moving according to the market. So there are different opinion on how to curb this trade deficit. Now you can see what is China doing. Around 3% of China's export comes to India, and only 0.9% of China's world import is coming from India. So, so today we decide to just sever our relations with China. You can very well imagine what China would do. It would say that, oh, if you are not interested, then we are likely to go to the other countries. And China trades heavily with the East Asian countries, especially the relatively poorer lot, whether it is Laos, Cambodia. Now, of course, Vietnam is growing. Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei. So China has a lot of stronghold in these East Asian countries. So nothing is going to happen if you sever the ties. You have to deal with the China diplomatically, military, of course, and you have to ensure that you improve your position by shifting the comparative advantage in our favor through use of 4IR, through investments, telecommunication, ports, harboring global value chains, focusing on the three E's. There are other factors also we have mentioned, and this trade course will spell that. These are the major Chinese investments from Zomato, Alibaba, and so on and so forth. 26 billion US dollars of Chinese investments. These are the top Chinese mobile brands, whether it's Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, and others. There are startups. There's Alibaba, there's Tencent, there's Xiaomi, and so on and so forth. Our exports, the top exporter of India is UAE with 9.32%. Then comes China, 5.33% of our world export goes to China. The bulk of components also imported. This is important that around 13.8% of our world imports are coming from China. And our 5.3% of India's exports is going to China. While if you talk about China, only 3% of their exports are coming to India, and their import dependence is also low to a level of 0.9%. This has to change. I talked about antibiotics being imported, electrical and electric engine parts being imported. There are 92 major Chinese funded startups in India. There are around 4 billion Chinese tech investments in startups. This is an interesting graph which says this is PW Research Center 2014, WDI 2014. This on the y-axis is countries which agrees with that trade is rather good, and on the x-axis is agrees with that trade increases wages. You see an upward trend, and uh, if you see uh, Vietnam, Indonesia, and India, if you see India is right in the middle, uh, it means that after the 1991 reforms, many have agreed that trade promotes growth. But whether that has been able to increase wages is something which has some doubtful uh, empirical evidence because of the labor market regulations in India. Wages may have gone up, but trade may not be the reason for that, because as we said that in India, lot of imports were in terms of the intermediate products, uh, leading to uh, say our dependence on the foreign countries, which may not have increased productivity and wages in India. This is a gravity model which is being used uh, for the quantitative analysis. This gravity model is coming from the concept given by Newton on what explains the force of gravity between nations, and it relates to distance, GDPs, remoteness index, which is a proxy for multilateral trade barriers, common border, common language, common currency, regional trade agreements, colonial history. These are all explanatory factors. Apart from there are cultural factors. For example, Ireland and US are very close culturally. Then there are geographical factors. There are factors related to transport costs. Many of the European city centers, urban cities, have rivers besides them, so there's a lot of use of water inland waterways, which promotes trade and growth in these countries. So they can be accounted here in the gravity model. So growth is from ideas from other countries. Eaton and Cotton estimate that innovation produced in the United States, Germany, and Japan account for more than 50% of the growth in the OECD countries. Innovations are not just in the air but are often embodied in imports and people brought in country through foreign investments. These are investments before and after liberalization, and you can see after trade liberalization, investments have jumped up in countries. This is a cross country evidence. As far as India is concerned, we still are heavily protected through the most favored nations, WTO defined most favored nations tariffs, then followed by Cambodia, Laos, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, and you can see that Brunei and Singapore have no tariffs at all. There may be non-tariff barriers, but as far as tariffs are concerned, they're not existing there at all. South Asia remains tariffs remain more restrictive than other regions, even without para tariffs. Para tariffs are just extra customs duty over and above the customs duty tariffs, be it the education cess or some extra tariffs on for some governmental policies. And you can see that in South Asia it's the highest, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, followed by Latin America, East Asia, Europe, and North America. There is a trade restrictiveness index by Key and Nikita. There is a trade restrictive index in services, that's OECD. Uh, and on both fronts, we find ourselves uh, high, top higher on the echelon because we protect our economy through various trade policy measures, be it tariffs, be it non-tariff barriers, and so on and so forth. If you look at the trade liberalization process among the South Asian countries, the South Asian free trade area has also not flourished. In fact, it is undermined by the sensitive list. This is the list of products in which uh, countries are hesitant to trade. So you can see the number of products in which countries are hesitant to trade. You can see India, you can see Pakistan, you can see Bangladesh. So there is lots of protectionism. Maybe this is because of the trust deficit. This is what this World Bank report claims. But whatever it is, there is so much of restrictions that instead of looking at the list in which we need to liberalize, the working party works on the sensitive list. And there is a methodology for working out the sensitive list. So integration in South Asia is non-transparent and protective tariffs, especially para-tariffs. There's non-tariff barriers, there's higher cost of connectivity, and at the broader level, there are trust deficits. So there's a lot of potential when it comes to intra-regional trade potential. This is using the same gravity model where you work out the predicted trade, compare it with the actual trade. If the predicted trade is greater than the actual trade, there's a trade gap, there's a potential. Okay? So there's still lots of potential of the level of 67 billion US dollars. This is again on importance of trade liberalization. This trade weighted average MFN tariffs are the highest in India, then followed by Cambodia, Laos, and so on. These are some uh, measures related to the WTO, wherein they want us to liberalize, be it investments, intellectual property rights, competition policies, electronic commerce, government procurement, dispute settlement process, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, trade facilitation. So you can see that trade is not only trade in merchandise, but these are all other factors uh, which are accounted in the WTO, and through that multilateral trade body, there is some sort of a pressure build up on countries, developing countries, to open up on all these areas. So we need to have a negotiating position regarding investments, movement of natural persons, intellectual property rights, competition, electronic commerce. In fact, recently we didn't sign the RCEP treaty, and one of the reasons was that we feared that the trade deficit with these East Asian nations would go up. But over and above this, we wanted that our trade and services are promoted in the East Asian economies, investments get promoted, the non-tariff barriers come down, be it the sanitary and phytosanitary measures or trade facilitation measures need to improve, the skilled persons need to move from here to there. So that was not forthcoming from the East Asian countries, so we had to uh, you know, refuse as on signing the RCEP treaty. Although uh, at hindsight, it looks as if we could have signed it, uh, then we would have had benefits uh, of aligning with those nations which have done relatively well today because of various reasons in terms of dealing with the pandemic crisis, whether it is health crisis or economic crisis, and otherwise also. So a proper analysis has to be done. What's the impact of tariffs on the entire economy? And for that, this study will suggest a GTAP model at the end. This is the relationship between increase in gross exports versus foreign content of exports. As I said, the importance of global value change, where the production processes are all fragmented. So if you find that in your exports, a part of your export value added is contributed by the foreigners, then your exports go up. This is the evidence uh, which says that why China did well, because they have lots of global value chains being harbored there. Lot of their gross exports contribution is coming from the foreigners, be it Germany, Italy, Switzerland, and so on and so forth. So today we want to increase our growth rates. We have to focus on our value chain, be it can be textiles or electronics and so on and so forth. We'll just see that what ASEAN did, the Asian nations did as far as global value chains are concerned. So ASEAN's participation in GVCs are much more, whether they are in tertiary or secondary. If you look at motor vehicles and other transport equipments, uh, if you look at electrical, electronic equipments and machinery, metal and metal products, petroleum, chemicals, uh, wood and wood products, textiles. There's so much of participation of the foreigners in their export process. And Malaysia takes the lead, followed by the other nations like Singapore, Thailand, Brunei, and so on and so forth. So even these relatively poorer countries of East Asia, they're doing well in terms of global value change. This is again the graph of India's trade position. As I said, export share is only 1.66%. The trade share of India is not more than 2%. While if you see the, the, uh, the China's share, it has gone up to 13%. This is exports of India to the world in 2007 and 2017. This is based on Hossmann's Atlas of Complexity. These squares show how much did India trade with uh, these nations, and you can see that in 2017 UAE had a share of 9.25%, Hong Kong 5.03%, but US was 15.65%. This is the right block. If you see the left block, again US share was 13.6%. UAE was again 8.70%. And then there were other countries like Hong Kong, China, uh, now it's Vietnam, and among South Asian countries, we have a free trade area with Sri Lanka. Then we are also trading with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Japan, and so on and so forth. Now, which country is responsible stakeholder that respects and champions international law? Uh, this was done by the state of Southeast Asia. This is a 2020 survey report in Singapore. And you can see that India has a percentage share of 31.1%. Japan is 51%, EU is 68%. China is only 10.5%. So India respects international law, and it is a country which is viewed not so negatively, which can be a threat to the other country's interest and sovereignty. Uh, if you look at China, every other country feels that it is a threat to them. 53.5% of the people feel that it's a threat to them. US also, the other countries feel that US is also a threat. Japan 5%, EU 3.5%, India 2.5%. But when it comes to taking interest in dealing with the global peace, security, prosperity, and governance, India is lagging behind. So there's so much that India could do at the international level in having a new global order wherein we strengthen multilateral institutions to bring peace, security, now of course vaccines, because we are the global pharmacy of the world, prosperity and governance. These about the trade theories that we'll be talking about. There's an old trade theory which is based on uh, technology and endowments, while the new trade theories which is based on, this is by Krugman, which is based on economies of scale and product differentiation. There are, of course, new trade theories by Mellitz, Cheney, Eaton, and Cotton, which talks about not only intensive margin but extensive margins. They take into account all these probability density functions in their analysis, be it the Pareto or the extreme value distributions. And very interesting uh, offshoots of the new trade models, wherein we see not only scale and selection effect but reallocation effects. And we find that exporters are involved in not only exports but selling domestically also. And that has important connotations for the estimation through gravity model. Uh, what are the features? The features are sunk cost of the new trade models. Features are intensive and extensive margins. Uh, feature is that uh, it tends to explain that exporters are a different lot. They've got higher productivity. They employ more. Uh, they trade with the distant partners, and so on and so forth. And exporters self-select themselves in the market, either selling domestically or exporting, depending on closed and open economy, multilateral liberalization, and commensurate shifts of the cutoff productivity levels. Again, on SAFTA, I've given you examples of how restrictive we are. This is on the possible relation that we can have with the ASEAN country on auto sector and so on and so forth. So with ASEAN, we can have an ASEAN India COVID Center, ASEAN India COVID funds, ASEAN India vaccine security and self-reliance, ASEAN India MSME, deeper and wider industrial linkages, ASEAN India FTA, BIMSTEC, RCEP, ASEAN India connectivity projects, and blue economy, logistic parks, digitalization cooperations, and so on and so forth. More on India's trade with. Now, this is the software that I talked about. We just bought it for rupees 37,000 from the Purdue University. What it does is that if you wish to understand what is the economy-wide impact of the tariffs, then you can use the GTAP software. It has 65 sectors, 121 countries, and 20 composite regions. And apart from that, it also works out, this what should be the financial package which can take care of the health and the economic crisis. How can we, what should be the budget to remove poverty in the economy, and so forth. So all economy-wide impact can be studied through this global trade analysis project of the Purdue University. And this, I forwarded the video links, have a look at it, because it's not very intuitive on how tariffs impacts the entire economy, be it its impact on welfare, which is further decomposed into allocative efficiency, investment savings, terms of trade, endowments, among others, and so on. So the Hurtels book and Korong article is the base references for GTAP. The database comes from the social accounting matrix and the input-output tables of the GTAP. These are the 65 products covering agriculture, manufacturing, and services. These are some research ideas that I've put because this course will be required to write a small paper based on data, and so I put some new research ideas related to India's agriculture, uh, and there are some other areas like spatial economy. I'll be happy to discuss these new research ideas when it comes to the discussion forum, which will happen every Tuesday from 8 to